They say grief fades with time, but they never tell you that sometimes it just learns to hide, waiting for the smallest sound, the faintest smell, the quietest moment to claw its way back to life. That morning started like any other. Coffee, silence, and the kind of emptiness that hums louder than any noise. But the moment the elevator froze between floors, I realized something was different. Something was coming. And it wasn't finished with me yet. The day had no reason to stand out. It was the kind of cold, gray morning where the world feels half awake and half forgotten, and the sunlight barely touches the window glass. I moved through my apartment like a ghost performing chores from another lifetime. The kettle hissed, the coffee brewed, the clock ticked, and every sound seemed to echo off the walls as if reminding me how alone I'd become. I'd learned to live inside quiet. It was safer there. Predictable, steady, numb. 2 years had passed since Daniel's accident, yet every morning felt like the first one without him. I'd stopped counting the days because the number didn't matter. Grief doesn't follow calendars. It lives in the moments you least expect, when the toast pops up, when the chair beside you stays empty, when you catch yourself laughing and then remember why you shouldn't be. I used to think time would heal me, but time only taught me how to pretend. I buttoned my coat, grabbed my purse, and glanced at the wedding photo still framed by the door. His smile was frozen in that picture, wide, warm, alive, the kind of smile that could steady a storm. I whispered a quiet good morning to it, like I always did, and stepped into the hallway. The elevator waited at the end, silent and still. That elevator had carried me through countless ordinary days, but I'd never really noticed it before, not until that morning. I pressed the call button. The light flickered red, and the metallic doors opened with a reluctant groan. The faint scent of oil and dust filled the air. I stepped inside and pressed lobby. The doors closed behind me with a sharp clang that echoed longer than it should have. The elevator started to descend, humming its usual rhythm, the kind of mechanical sound you stop hearing after a while. I leaned against the railing and closed my eyes, lost in the quiet rhythm of movement. But halfway down, there was a sudden jolt. The light above me flickered once, then went out completely. Everything stopped. The floor beneath me froze, the hum vanished. Silence swallowed the air. I stood perfectly still, heart hammering in the darkness, waiting for the machinery to start again. It didn't. I pressed the emergency button, once, twice, 3 times, but no sound came. No buzz, no voice. Nothing. I tried my phone, but there was no signal. The only sound left was my breathing. Sharp, uneven, filling the small space like panic itself. I told myself not to overreact. Elevators stall all the time. Someone would fix it. Someone always does. But the longer I stood there, the louder the silence became. Heavy and unnatural, pressing against my skin. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I pressed my palms against the cold metal, calling out for help. But my voice came back to me in fragments, echoing off the walls. Then, from somewhere below, I heard it. At first it was faint, so soft I thought it was my imagination. A sound that didn't belong in the mechanical quiet of an elevator shaft. It was low, steady, and achingly familiar. A man's voice, humming. Not random, not tuneless. A melody. My stomach dropped. I held my breath, listening harder. The sound grew clearer. Notes strung together in a rhythm I knew by heart. It couldn't be. It was impossible. He was humming our song. Daniel used to hum it while fixing things around the apartment, when he thought I wasn't listening. It wasn't even a real song. He made it up one evening after a storm knocked the power out. "So the dark doesn't feel so empty," he'd said, sitting on the floor beside me, candlelight dancing on his face. That melody had belonged to us, and when he died, I swore I'd never hear it again. But now, here it was, floating through the elevator doors. Real, alive. I felt my knees weaken. Every rational thought screamed that it was coincidence, maybe another tenant, maybe a tune from someone's radio. But no, it wasn't. The humming was right there, beneath me, soft and haunting, almost tender. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. "Is someone down there?" The humming stopped for a heartbeat. Then, almost deliberately, it started again, louder this time, slower, each note stretching, like it wanted me to listen, like it knew I was listening. I backed into the corner of the elevator, eyes locked on the door. My throat tightened. The air felt heavier, harder to breathe. I thought about every story I'd ever heard about ghosts, coincidences, grief playing tricks on the mind. I wanted to believe that's all it was, a cruel trick of memory. But deep down, I knew this was something else. The elevator creaked suddenly, jerking slightly as the lights flickered back on. I gasped, pressing myself against the railing. The floor indicator blinked. 3, 2, 1. Slowly, the elevator began to move again, groaning as if something heavy weighed it down. The humming didn't stop. It followed the movement, staying just beneath me, like a shadow traveling in perfect rhythm. When the doors slid open to the lobby, I stood frozen, my hand hovering over the panel. The soft hum was right outside now, just beyond the opening, clearer than ever. I forced myself to step forward. The air felt different out there, colder, sharper, carrying the faint scent of dust and oil. My eyes adjusted to the dim light. A man stood in the hallway, leaning slightly against a metal cart filled with tools. Blue coveralls, sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark hair, flecked with gray. His head was bent slightly as he worked on a broken panel near the wall. He was humming. The same melody. Every note precise, every pause deliberate. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. My mouth went dry. I wanted to say something, anything, but my voice refused to form. I just stood there, staring, trying to make sense of the impossible. He looked up slowly, almost as if he'd felt me watching him. His eyes met mine, calm but unreadable. There was a faint smile at the corner of his lips, gentle, patient, knowing. "Sorry about that, ma'am," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "This old elevator's been giving us trouble lately." His voice, deep, smooth, familiar, hit me like a punch. It wasn't just the tone. It was the way he said, "ma'am," the slight rasp at the end of his words. The same cadence I used to tease Daniel about when he'd call me from the garage late at night. Every inch of me went cold. He didn't seem to notice my shock. He just kept talking, casual and polite, like he hadn't just pulled me out of a waking nightmare. "You're safe now. Sorry for the scare," he said, his smile fading into something softer. "Sometimes these things stop between floors. You'd be surprised how often it happens." I wanted to ask who he was, how he knew that song, why his voice made my hands tremble. But the words tangled in my throat. I could only stare at him, heart pounding, mind spinning. He picked up his toolbox, slung it easily by his side, and walked past me towards the service hallway. But as he did, I heard it again. That tune. The same one. Hummed under his breath, low and steady, echoing softly as he disappeared behind the door marked "Maintenance." And that's when I realized I wasn't imagining it. The song wasn't random. He knew it. Somehow, he knew it. As the elevator doors slowly closed behind him, sealing the quiet once more, I stood trembling, because the man who had just fixed my elevator was humming a melody only my dead husband ever knew. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if I'd just met a stranger or something far worse. It wasn't the broken elevator that terrified me. It was the voice outside it. Familiar, steady, and impossibly alive. For a few seconds after the doors groaned open, I couldn't move. The air felt thick, like the world had shrunk to the narrow space between me and the man standing there. He wore the kind of uniform you stop noticing. Blue coveralls, sleeves rolled up, the faint smell of oil and dust clinging to him. But there was something in his posture, something in the way he tilted his head slightly when he spoke, that made my heart falter. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, voice low and measured. "Looks like she jammed up again. You must have been stuck a while." It wasn't his words. It was the rhythm of them, the unhurried calm, the soft rasp that clung to his tone like sandpaper smoothed by years of use. My body went cold. For a moment, I couldn't answer. I just stared at him, my mind catching fragments of a life that didn't exist anymore. My husband used to sound like that when he wanted to keep me calm. The same soft edge, the same steady warmth hidden behind practical words. He gave me a polite nod, as if waiting for permission to approach. "If you step back a bit, I'll take a look at the panel," he said. I obeyed before I even thought about it, pressing myself against the back of the elevator. My pulse was racing, but his movements were slow, deliberate, and unbothered. He knelt by the panel, his hands moving with quiet certainty. The metal door creaked as he pried it open, light from his small work lamp spilling across the floor. Sparks flickered faintly from a tangle of exposed wires. He muttered something under his breath, not frustration, but habit, the way Daniel used to mutter when fixing things around the house. I could almost hear him again, cursing softly at stubborn bolts, making promises to fix it right this time. I swallowed hard, pushing the memory back down where it belonged. The man worked quickly, fingers deft, confident. Every small sound, the click of tools, the soft hum of concentration, felt like an echo from another lifetime. He wasn't just repairing an elevator, he was rebuilding a memory I thought I'd buried. I studied his face, trying to see past the shadows cast by the narrow light. He had lines near his eyes, not from age but from expression, like a man who smiled often but carried the weight of things he'd rather not remember. There was something kind about him, something patient, but there was also something deeply familiar that my mind refused to accept. The air between us felt alive, humming with recognition I couldn't explain. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but the words tangled in my throat. My hands fidgeted at my sides. I finally managed a whisper. "Have we met before?" He looked up, and the beam of his lamp caught his face. His eyes, gray, steady, thoughtful, met mine. "Don't think so," he said gently. "I'm new here. Started last month." His answer was too simple, too clean. "New?" I repeated, my voice catching slightly. He nodded. "Yeah. Place needed extra hands, old wiring, ancient machinery, you name it." His tone carried the faintest trace of humor, like someone trying to put me at ease. But even his smile, the small, half-formed one that tugged at the corner of his lips, made something ache deep inside me. He turned back to the panel, twisting a wire with practiced precision. "These things act up all the time," he said. "People think elevators are reliable. They're not. They remember everything, every pull, every stop, every weight they've carried. Eventually, they get tired." His words made me shiver. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. The way he spoke wasn't casual. It was too thoughtful, too poetic for a man fixing machinery. Daniel used to talk like that, too, about broken things as if they had souls. I stared down at his hands, the knuckles bruised and rough, veins tracing lines of effort. A faint scar ran across his wrist, the same spot where Daniel burned himself once fixing our kitchen sink. My stomach twisted. I wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, but the memory of that night came flooding back. The smell of solder, the hiss of the flame, his laugh when I fussed over him. "It's just a mark," he'd said. "Proof I fixed something that needed fixing." The man in front of me wiped his hands on a rag, closing the panel door with a metallic click. "There we go," he murmured, standing up. "You should be good now." The elevator lights brightened. The hum returned. The world seemed to wake up again. "Thank you," I said quietly. My voice sounded too thin, too small. He gave a slight nod. "Just doing my job." But even then, something lingered in his gaze, something unspoken. He held my eyes a beat too long, like he was searching for something familiar in me, too. And for that moment, neither of us moved. It felt like standing at the edge of a memory we'd both lived, but couldn't name. "Do I remind you of someone?" I asked, my voice shaking before I could stop it. His jaw tightened just slightly, enough for me to notice. "You remind me," he said slowly, "of someone who waited too long for an answer." Before I could respond, he stepped back, his expression softening. "Try not to use this elevator for a bit," he said, lifting his toolbox. "It's temperamental." "Temperamental?" I echoed weakly, forcing a small, nervous smile. He chuckled under his breath, but it wasn't amusement. It was something heavier. "Yeah, some things just get stuck between where they are and where they're supposed to be." I stood frozen as he turned away, my mind spinning between fear and disbelief. His footsteps echoed down the hall, fading slowly until only the hum of the elevator filled the air again. I turned toward the mirrored panel beside the door. My reflection stared back, pale, shaken, eyes wide. Behind me, the faint outline of the empty hallway stretched on, silent and still. But as the elevator doors began to close, I looked up one last time. And in that brief instant, through the narrowing gap, I caught a final glimpse of him. The light from the ceiling flickered across his face, catching his eyes just long enough for me to see their color clearly. Gray, soft, deep, and full of recognition I couldn't deny. It was impossible, but I knew what I saw. As the elevator doors sealed shut, I stood frozen, because for one fleeting second, in the glow of that dim light, I could have sworn I wasn't looking at a stranger at all. I was looking into my husband's eyes. His smile wasn't friendly. It was personal, like a memory I'd buried, clawing its way back to life. He stood there in the hallway, the light above flickering softly against the metal of his toolbox, his posture calm but deliberate. Everything about him was unremarkable. The plain blue coveralls, the worn work boots, the badge clipped crookedly to his chest. And yet I couldn't look away. The air felt heavier between us, thick with something unspoken. My mouth was dry, my pulse uneven. I forced myself to speak, my voice barely steady. "Thank you," I said, though I wasn't sure what I was thanking him for, fixing the elevator, or reminding me that ghosts could look very much alive. He nodded slightly, a faint smile forming on his lips. It wasn't the polite, professional smile of a stranger. It was slow, familiar, intimate, the kind of smile Daniel used to give me right before he said something he knew I'd argue with. The kind that made warmth creep up my neck even when I was angry. It was the smile of a man who'd known me once, long before the world went quiet. "Just doing my job," he said simply. His voice carried that same quiet steadiness, that low hum at the end of each sentence that used to make my heart settle when Daniel spoke. The sound struck something deep inside me. I tried to look away but couldn't. There was something magnetic about him, something my mind couldn't reconcile. Every logical part of me screamed that I was overreacting, projecting grief onto a stranger. But the ache in my chest didn't care about logic. It only cared about memory. He extended his hand then, almost shyly. "Name's Elias," he said. "Maintenance. They just hired me last month." "Elias?" The name felt strange in my mouth when I repeated it under my breath, like a word that didn't belong to the moment. I hesitated, my name suddenly foreign to me. "Claire." When I said it, something flickered across his expression. A pause. Barely noticeable, but real. The faint tremor in his fingers, the quick inhale he didn't quite disguise. He recovered quickly, that polite half-smile returning, but not before I saw it. Recognition. He knew my name. Somehow he already knew it. "It's a pleasure," he said softly, but his voice carried something heavier than formality, almost regret. He knelt again, tightening one of the bolts near the panel, his head bowed low. I watched the movements of his hands, precise, methodical, and then I saw it. A scar. Thin, pale, curved slightly across his wrist, not fresh, but old enough to have healed unevenly. I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was in the exact same place where Daniel had burned himself that winter when he tried to fix our old stove. I remembered the smell of melted plastic, the flash of pain on his face, the way I'd rushed to wrap his wrist with a towel, scolding him for being stubborn. He'd laughed, kissed my forehead, and said, "Guess I'll carry proof of being useful for once." My fingers trembled as I stared at that scar on Elias's wrist. I tried to convince myself that scars repeat, that life leaves its marks in similar places on different people. But no, that shape, that faint curve, the placement just above the bone, it was too exact, too familiar. I couldn't stop watching him, as if staring hard enough might make the world make sense again. He looked up once, catching my gaze. "Something wrong?" he asked. "No," I lied quickly. "It's just that scar." He glanced down, his expression unreadable. "This? Oh, old burn. Years ago." His tone was light, but there was something about the way he said it, the quickness, the way he looked away right after, that made it sound like a lie rehearsed too often. I swallowed hard. "I see," I managed to say. He stood then, brushing his hands on his coveralls, avoiding my eyes. "Well, the elevator should be fine now. Just give her a gentle ride for the next few days. These old machines don't like surprises." His words were casual, but his tone wasn't. There was a depth there, something that lingered behind every syllable. My mind spun with questions I didn't know how to ask. I wanted to demand why he looked at me like that, why he spoke like he already knew me, why he carried my husband's song in his voice. But fear kept me quiet. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being right. He stepped toward the service cart, lifting his toolbox with practiced ease. The soft clang of metal tools inside echoed faintly down the hallway. "You take care, Claire," he said without turning. My name sounded different coming from him, warmer, almost protective. He started to walk away, his footsteps steady, measured. The sound of his boots against the linoleum floor faded slowly. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like minutes, my entire body trembling from holding too much inside. It wasn't until he reached the far end of the hallway that I noticed it, the faint gleam of light reflecting off his wrist as he moved his arm. I squinted through the dimness, my heart skipping a beat. There, on the pale curve of his skin, a glint of gold caught the light. For a second, I thought it was a bracelet. But then he shifted, and the gleam flickered again, unmistakably circular, faintly dull, yet familiar enough to freeze me in place. It wasn't just any ring, it was the ring. Daniel's wedding ring. The one that had vanished the night of the accident. The one I'd never found. But Elias wasn't wearing any ring. The reflection had come from inside the open lip of his glove, as if something hidden underneath had caught the light just long enough for me to see it. My stomach twisted. I blinked, and it was gone. I wanted to call out, to demand an explanation, but my throat closed. All I could do was watch as he turned the corner and disappeared into the maintenance stairwell, the sound of his toolbox echoing like a slow heartbeat until silence returned. I stared down at my shaking hands, cold despite the heat of the building. My mind replayed every moment, the scar, the smile, the way he said my name. It couldn't be him. It wasn't him. And yet every instinct inside me whispered that something about Elias wasn't just coincidence. That smile he gave me before leaving, it hadn't been polite. It had been knowing. As he vanished from sight, the elevator light above me flickered once more, and in the polished metal of the door, I caught a faint reflection, the same gold glint I'd seen on his wrist, glowing for a heartbeat before fading away. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever Elias was hiding, it was something Daniel never meant for me to find. I heard him hum again, that same lullaby my husband used to play when I couldn't sleep. No one else should have known it. The morning light slid through the blinds in pale streaks, cutting the room into fragments of gold and shadow. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face again. Elias's face. That strange half-smile that looked too familiar to belong to a stranger. I'd spent half the night convincing myself I'd imagined it, that grief had tricked my eyes, that memories could wear the faces of men who didn't deserve them. But even in the quiet dawn, when reason should have returned, something in my chest still felt wrong. I made my coffee, just as I always did, but it tasted flat, as if something inside me refused to wake. The apartment was still, too still, the kind of stillness that makes the ticking clock sound like a hammer. I sat by the window, staring down at the lobby below, trying to ground myself in the ordinariness of morning, people leaving for work, the soft shuffle of mail being sorted, the hum of traffic outside. But then I saw him. Elias was in the lobby, mopping the floor near the elevator. His movements were unhurried, precise, almost graceful. The same rhythm, the same calm that unnerved me before. The faint light from the tall glass windows caught his profile. And then I heard it. At first I thought it was in my head, an echo of yesterday's terror. But no. It was real, unmistakably real. He was humming again. That same melody. I gripped my coffee cup tighter. The tune floated upward, faint but clear, threading through the quiet like a ghost of memory. Every note fell exactly where it used to when Daniel hummed it. Slow, gentle, a little uneven at the end, like he was holding back the last bit to make me laugh. My throat tightened. I could almost feel Daniel again, the warmth of his arm around me, the vibration of his chest when he hummed that very tune as I drifted to sleep. But now that song belonged to a stranger mopping the lobby floor. I couldn't just sit there anymore. I needed to know. I needed to hear him admit it wasn't what I thought it was. When I stepped out of the elevator and walked toward him, the smell of cleaning solution mixed with the faint metallic scent of oil from his tools. Elias didn't look up immediately. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then he turned, and the moment his eyes met mine, the humming stopped. "Morning," he said casually, his tone even. "Elevator working fine today?" "Yes," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks for fixing it." "Of course," he said, dipping the mop again, squeezing water from it before swiping another slow arc across the tile. "Old things just need a bit of attention. Same as people, I suppose." I hesitated. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it. "That tune you were humming," I said finally, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Where did you learn it?" He looked up at me, expression unreadable. "Tune?" "Yes," I said, struggling to steady my voice. "Just now?" "You were humming something." He leaned on the mop handle slightly, thinking for a moment. Then that small smile returned, the one that made my chest tighten. "I don't know," he said lightly. "It's been in my head lately. Guess it's one of those things you pick up somewhere and can't shake." The way he said it, calm, almost teasing, sent a chill down my spine. He turned away again, humming once more, as if to prove how harmless it was. But to me, it wasn't harmless. It was haunting. Every note was identical to the melody Daniel used to hum only for me, the song no one else in the world should have known. I left the lobby without another word, my hands trembling so badly I had to grip the rail to keep them still. The elevator doors closed around me with a quiet hiss, but the melody stayed trapped in my ears, looping endlessly like a record that refused to end. All day at work, the sound haunted me. It wove itself into the drone of the office printer, the buzz of the fluorescent lights, the rhythm of my footsteps on the tile. I tried to lose myself in routine, emails, meetings, lunch breaks, but every moment was soaked in that sound, that soft, steady humming. By the time I returned home that evening, exhaustion clung to me like static. The building was quiet. Too quiet. Even the elevator seemed to hum lower, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I tried to distract myself, poured wine, turned on the television, let the flickering blue light wash over the walls. But beneath the noise, I thought I heard something faint. I muted the TV, heart pounding. For a moment, there was nothing. Then it came again. A hum. Soft, distant, rising through the vents. I stood still, listening. The melody was muffled by layers of steel and air, but I knew it instantly. It was the same lullaby. Daniel's lullaby. Elias's lullaby. My lullaby. I pressed my hand against the wall near the vent. The vibration of sound traveled through the metal. Faint, rhythmic, deliberate. It was coming from below my floor. The apartment felt colder suddenly, though the air hadn't changed. Every light seemed dimmer, every corner darker. I turned slowly, eyes scanning the room, half expecting to see him standing there. My mind whispered that it wasn't possible, but grief doesn't obey logic. I stepped closer to the vent. The humming grew louder, more distinct. Whoever was making it was close, directly below me. I could almost imagine him standing there in the maintenance room, head tilted back, smiling as he hummed into the quiet. "Elias?" I called softly, my voice trembling. The humming continued for a moment, then stopped abruptly. Silence fell heavy and complete, so thick it pressed against my ears. I waited, breath held, but there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the faint hum of the building itself. I leaned closer, my forehead nearly touching the metal. "Who are you?" I whispered. For a second, there was no response, and then a sound. Not humming? Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from the floor below. One after another, measured and steady, moving directly beneath where I stood. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. The steps paused, as if whoever was walking had stopped to listen. Then another step. Closer this time. I pressed a hand over my mouth to stop myself from making a sound. The footsteps circled once, then faded, growing fainter until they were gone completely. But even as silence returned, I could feel it, that strange electric awareness that comes when someone, somewhere, is thinking of you, watching you, remembering you. I stared at the vent for a long time, every muscle in my body tight, my thoughts spinning into a blur of fear and longing. I wanted to believe it was coincidence, that I'd misheard, that grief was playing its cruel tricks again. But deep down, I knew what I'd heard wasn't my imagination. The song was real. The footsteps were real. And whoever Elias truly was, he carried more than a toolbox and a polite smile. He carried the sound of my husband's ghost. As I stood frozen in the quiet, the vent rattled once more. A single metallic tap, sharp and deliberate, like a knock from the other side. I took a step back, my breath catching, and whispered his name into the dark. "Daniel." The silence that followed was unbearable, right before the sound of those same footsteps began again, directly beneath my floor. I told myself I wasn't stalking him, but when grief looks like someone you lost, reason becomes a whisper you stop listening to. I spent the next day trying to convince myself to let it go. It wasn't healthy, this fixation, this desperate attempt to pull logic out of something that clearly wasn't logical. I told myself that the humming, the scar, the ring, the way he said my name, it was all coincidence. There was no mystery, no hidden meaning, no ghost whispering through the walls. But every time I tried to believe that, something inside me pushed back. Grief has a way of blurring the line between reality and hope. And I was standing right on it. By the time the sun set, I'd given up pretending I wasn't curious. The truth was, I needed to see him again. I needed to know who Elias really was, or what he was. So I waited. From my apartment window, I could see the faint glow of the lobby below. The janitor's cart sat parked near the service elevator, its reflection shimmering across the polished floor. The building was quiet. Most of the tenants had gone to bed. The hum of the central heating was the only sound that dared to exist. At 11:47 p.m., movement caught my eye. Elias stepped out from the janitor's closet, the keys on his belt jangling softly as he locked the door behind him. He looked different in the dim light, quieter somehow, his usual calm replaced with something heavier. He adjusted his gloves, lifted his old metal toolbox, and walked towards the stairwell. Not the elevator. The stairs. Something in my chest twisted. He wasn't just finishing a shift. He was going somewhere. Somewhere he didn't want to be seen. Before I could second-guess myself, I grabbed my coat and slipped into the hallway. The air was colder there, carrying the faint scent of cleaning solution and metal. Each sound, my footsteps, my breathing, felt too loud. I paused at the top of the stairs, watching as Elias descended, his boots echoing faintly against the concrete steps. I waited a few seconds before following. Every part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I was crossing a line. But logic had stopped speaking to me hours ago. I moved quietly, keeping my distance, the metal railing cold beneath my fingertips. The stairwell lights flickered every few seconds, casting Elias's shadow long across the walls. I trailed him down 2 floors until he reached the basement level, the part of the building marked "Maintenance Personnel Only." He pushed through the heavy door, the sound of hinges echoing into the darkness. When it closed, silence followed, thick and absolute. I crept closer, my heart hammering in my chest. My hand hesitated over the doorknob. For a moment I thought I heard that same faint humming again, his voice, low and steady, drifting through the metal. I turned the knob slowly. It was unlocked. The door opened with a soft groan, and I stepped inside. The air hit me first, thick with dust, oil, and the sharp scent of rust. It was cooler down there, almost damp. The only light came from a single bulb hanging over a workbench in the far corner. The rest of the space was swallowed by shadows, the kind that seemed to breathe when you looked at them too long. Elias was nowhere to be seen. I took a few careful steps forward, my shoes crunching lightly against the grit on the floor. Old machinery sat covered in tarps. Pipes lined the walls like ribs in the skeleton of the building, and in the center of it all was a long wooden table. On top of it sat a toolbox, old, dented, the paint chipped away until only dull patches of silver remained. Even from a distance, I recognized it. The same one he always carried. The lid was half open, tools scattered loosely across the top. A wrench, a screwdriver, a coiled wire. But there was something else. Something out of place. A corner of yellowed paper peeking out from beneath a rusted wrench. I stepped closer, barely breathing. The sound of the building above, the faint thud of pipes, the hum of electricity, seemed to fade. All I could hear was the rhythm of my heartbeat. The photograph corner was worn, the edge frayed like it had been handled too many times. My hands trembled as I reached toward it. I shouldn't have touched it, but curiosity drowned out fear. I slid the wrench aside and pulled the photo free. The moment I saw it, the world stopped. It was my wedding photo. Not a copy, not a resemblance. My photo? The one that used to sit on the nightstand beside my bed, the same one that vanished after Daniel's funeral. There we were, me in my lace dress smiling through tears. Him, with his arm around my waist, looking at me the way no one else ever had. I knew every detail of that picture, the crooked boutonniere, the faint blur where sunlight caught the lens. My breath hitched. I turned it over, and my knees almost gave out. On the back, written in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words. "You found me." I stared at the message until my eyes blurred. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. It made no sense. That handwriting couldn't be here. This photo couldn't be here. None of this could be happening. Behind me, a soft sound broke the silence, the creak of a floorboard. I spun around, clutching the photo to my chest. Shadows shifted across the walls, stretching and folding in the weak light. My breath quickened. "Elias?" I whispered. No answer. The bulb above me flickered once, twice, then steadied. I could feel the weight of eyes in the dark, watching, waiting. The air felt different now, thicker, charged. I stepped backward, my heel knocking against a pipe. The sound echoed, bouncing off the concrete walls. Still no movement. My gaze darted back to the table. The toolbox sat there, silent and open, the smell of oil and metal filling the air. For a moment, I thought about putting the photo back, pretending I'd never been there, pretending none of it was real. Then, from somewhere behind the wall, I heard it again, humming. That same soft, steady tune. It drifted through the cracks in the concrete, moving closer with each passing second. I froze, my pulse thundering in my ears. He was there, somewhere nearby. I glanced toward the far side of the room. A narrow corridor led deeper into the maintenance tunnels, the light disappearing into blackness. The humming came from there. Slow, calm, almost mournful. I should have run. I should have left right then. But something about that sound pulled me in. I took one small step forward, then another. The photo trembled in my hand. "Daniel," I whispered before I could stop myself. The humming stopped. For 3 long seconds there was nothing. Then a voice, soft, familiar, barely a breath. "You shouldn't be down here." My heart stuttered. It wasn't Daniel's voice. It was Elias's. I turned toward the sound, but before I could see him, the bulb above me flickered violently and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The only light left came from the thin beam spilling in through the open door, just enough for me to see the toolbox glint once more. And there, resting beside it in the faint glow, lay the photograph, my wedding photo. But this time, Daniel's face in it was gone. The moment I touched that photograph, my world shattered. My face, my husband's smile, in his toolbox. I couldn't stop staring at it. The old photograph trembled in my hands, the paper soft from years of handling, the edges burned and corners folded as if it had been rescued from fire. My fingers traced the image, Daniel's arm around my waist, his smile radiant and alive, mine caught in that same moment of disbelief and love. It was a picture that belonged to another lifetime, one that ended in sirens and headlights, and the kind of silence that breaks you in half. How could it be here? The room felt smaller with each passing second, the walls inching closer as my breath came unevenly. The air smelled like metal and dust, but beneath it was something else, something faintly familiar, like the scent of his old workshop, a mixture of grease, coffee, and cedarwood soap. For a second, I could almost imagine Daniel was near, his presence slipping through the cracks of the present. But no, this wasn't memory. This was impossible. I turned the photo over again. My name was written on the back, the ink slightly smeared but unmistakable. Daniel's handwriting. Slanted, clean, a little rushed. I'd know it anywhere. The same handwriting from the notes he used to leave on the fridge. "Don't forget to smile today. Back late, love you. Coffee's on the counter." My vision blurred. I blinked hard, the room spinning slightly around me. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the photo. There was no explanation that made sense. No reason this should be in Elias's toolbox. Unless he'd known Daniel. But how? The idea clawed at my mind, searching for logic. Daniel's death had been sudden, an accident that happened miles away from here. He didn't work in this building. He didn't even know anyone who did. And yet, here it was. Our photograph, hidden in the janitor's old metal box. I heard it then. A sound. The faint scrape of a shoe against concrete. A shadow stretched across the floor before I even turned. I froze. My fingers tightened around the photo, heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I lifted my head. Elias stood in the doorway. The dim light from the hall spilled around him, outlining his frame in a pale glow. His expression wasn't what I expected. No surprise, no anger, not even curiosity. It was something else, something softer, heavier. Relief. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick enough to feel. He took one slow step forward, the sound of his boots echoing faintly through the basement. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. His tone wasn't harsh. If anything, it sounded weary, like he'd been expecting this, like he'd been waiting for me to find him. I clutched the photograph tighter. "Where did you get this?" I asked. My voice broke halfway through. "Why do you have this?" He looked at the photo in my hand, but didn't reach for it. His eyes, gray and unreadable, shifted slightly. Not guilt, not surprise, but something closer to acceptance. "I didn't take it," he said finally. "It's always been there." "That's impossible," I whispered. He gave a faint, sad smile. "Not everything that's impossible stays that way." The way he said it made my skin crawl, not from fear, but from recognition. Daniel used to talk like that, in riddles, in half-truths meant to sound profound. I stepped back, my breath unsteady. "You knew him, didn't you?" Elias didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the photo, then lifted to mine. "I knew of him," he said. "And I knew this moment would come." I felt my throat tighten. "What moment?" He stepped closer, and instinctively I stepped back. "The one where you'd find that," he said softly, nodding toward the photograph. My pulse quickened. "How could you possibly know that?" He hesitated, studying me for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth to offer. "Because he told me you would." The words landed like a blow. My knees nearly gave out. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "He's dead. Daniel's dead." Elias's eyes softened, but he didn't look away. "I know." He set his toolbox down on the floor beside me, the sound of metal against concrete ringing sharp and final. "He told me you'd find it here," he continued, voice low and deliberate. "He said it would be when you were ready." "Ready for what?" My mind screamed for answers, but my mouth couldn't form the words. Everything about the moment felt too fragile, too surreal. The basement lights flickered again, shadows shifting across his face. "How could he have told you anything?" I said finally, my voice shaking. "You never met him?" Elias's jaw tightened, a flicker of something like pain flashing through his expression. "I didn't say I met him," he murmured, "but he found a way to tell me anyway." My entire body went cold. "What does that mean?" He looked at me, his gray eyes steady and strangely gentle. "It means he left pieces of himself behind. Pieces for you to find when you were ready to stop running from what happened." I shook my head. The words tumbling out faster now, desperate and uneven. No, that doesn't make sense. You're not making sense." Elias didn't argue. He just took another small step forward, lowering his voice until it was barely above a whisper. "You've spent 2 years pretending he was gone," he said. "But not everything dies the way you think it does." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why now?" He tilted his head slightly, that same faint, knowing smile touching his lips. "Because he said it's time." For a heartbeat, the world went silent. The hum of the pipes, the creak of the ceiling, everything faded beneath those words. "It's time." The phrase looped through my mind, over and over. I remembered the last conversation I had with Daniel before the accident, the way he kissed my forehead, the way he said, "When it's time, you'll understand." I'd never known what he meant. Until now. My hands trembled around the photo, the ink on the back smudged where my thumb pressed against his name. Elias's gaze locked with mine, his voice barely a breath as he said it again. Quieter this time, as if repeating something sacred. "He told me you'd find that," he whispered. "He said it's time." And in that moment, I realized that whatever had started with a broken elevator wasn't just about malfunctioning machinery. It was about something buried, something Daniel had left waiting for me in the dark. My voice trembled. "Where did you get this photo?" His answer wasn't an explanation. It was a confession. The air between us thickened until it felt impossible to breathe. The low hum of the basement machinery faded beneath the weight of his silence. Elias stood still, his shadow spilling across the floor, his expression unreadable. I could hear my own heartbeat, pounding so hard it drowned out reason. I held up the photograph, the edges trembling between my fingers. "Where did you get this?" My voice cracked halfway through the sentence. "Tell me, Elias, where did you get this photo?" He didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He just exhaled slowly, like someone carrying a truth too heavy to keep hidden any longer. "He trusted me," he said finally, "before he died." For a second, the words didn't make sense. They hung in the air, soft and casual, like they didn't just tear open the fabric of reality. "Trusted you?" I repeated, shaking my head. "No, that's not possible. You couldn't have known him. You weren't there. He took one step forward, and I took one back. The photograph slipped slightly from my grip. "He trusted me," Elias said again, quieter this time, almost like an apology. "And he made me promise to keep something safe until you were ready." The way he said it, so calm, so steady, made my stomach twist. My mind scrambled for an explanation, any explanation, that could make sense of the impossible. "You're lying," I whispered. "You have to be lying." Elias's expression didn't change. I wish I was. Anger surged up through my grief, sharp and blinding. "No, you don't get to do this," I said, my voice breaking into a shout. "You don't get to show up out of nowhere with his handwriting, with our photo, and talk like you knew him. Who are you?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, his calm unshaken by the storm in my voice. The quiet in his face only made me angrier. "You think this is funny?" I snapped. "You think this is some kind of game? Because it's not. My husband is dead. Do you understand that? He's gone." "I understand," he said softly. "More than you think." I laughed bitterly, a harsh, broken sound that echoed through the basement. "You understand?" I said, my voice trembling. "You don't even know what that means. You didn't hold him while the paramedics said there was nothing they could do. You didn't bury him. You didn't wake up every morning thinking for one stupid second that maybe it was all a nightmare." Elias's gaze dropped to the floor. For the first time, I saw something shift in him. A flicker of emotion, something raw and almost painful. "You're right," he murmured. "I wasn't there that night. I didn't see it happen. But I was there before." My breath caught. "Before?" He nodded. "He found me. I was broken, I guess you could say. And he helped me. He didn't even know me, not really, but he still helped. That's the kind of man he was, wasn't he?" I couldn't answer. My throat was closing, my heart slamming against my ribs. Daniel was always helping people, always finding broken things and trying to fix them. He couldn't pass a stray dog without feeding it, couldn't walk away from someone who needed a hand. That was his curse. And maybe that's why he'd ended up in that car that night, helping someone else. Elias looked up, meeting my eyes again. "He told me about you," he said quietly. "About the way you used to make him laugh when he couldn't find the words. About the song he hummed for you when you couldn't sleep. About the promise he made before he left." I felt my knees weaken. "Stop. He told me to find you if anything happened," Elias continued, "and to give you what he left behind." "Stop it," I said again, my voice breaking this time. "You don't get to say his name. You don't get to talk about him like that." "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his tone almost pleading now. "I'm here because he asked me to be." Tears burned my eyes, anger mixing with fear until I couldn't tell which was which. "You don't know what you're saying," I whispered. "He didn't know you. He didn't ask you for anything. This isn't possible." Elias took another step closer, and I could see the truth in his eyes. Not madness, not deceit, but grief. The same kind I saw every morning in my own reflection. "He knew this would sound impossible," he said. "He knew you wouldn't believe me. But he made me promise. He said there would come a day when the elevator would stop, and that's when I'd know it was time." The basement felt colder suddenly, the kind of cold that crawls beneath the skin. "The elevator?" I whispered. He nodded. He said that's how I'd find you. He said you'd be the one who couldn't ignore a broken thing. My throat tightened. The echo of his words struck too close to the truth. That was exactly what Daniel used to say about me. That I couldn't leave anything unfinished. That I needed to understand, even when understanding hurt. Elias knelt then, picking up the toolbox that sat at his feet. He ran a hand across its dented surface, the gesture gentle, almost reverent. He gave me this, he said. Told me to keep it safe. Told me you'd come for it when you were ready. I stared at the box, at the same place where I'd found the photograph. What's in it? I asked. He didn't look at me when he answered. Something he didn't have time to give you. My hands shook. Then give it to me. He didn't move. Not yet. Why not? I demanded. His eyes lifted to mine. Because he said you'd have to choose to see it first. That you'd have to believe it was real. I took a step forward, voice rising. Believe what? That he never really left, Elias said softly. The words hit me like a wave. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My chest ached, my vision blurred. I wanted to scream, to tell him he was wrong, to tell him this was cruel. But something in his face stopped me. The quiet certainty, the sorrow that felt too deep to fake. He reached into his pocket then, pulling something out slowly. The faint glint of metal caught the light. My heart dropped when I saw it. A small, rusted key, old and worn, its surface scarred with time. He held it out to me, resting it in his open palm. He said you'd know where it fits, Elias whispered. I stared at the key, the edges catching the weak light from the hanging bulb. I didn't recognize it. And yet, deep inside, something in me did. As I reached toward it, Elias's voice softened to a whisper, almost trembling now, like a man speaking a truth that could shatter everything. He said, this is where it begins, Claire. He said, once you turn this key, there's no going back. The key fit a door I'd passed 100 times, a door I'd never noticed until that night. The key was small enough to disappear in my palm, yet it felt impossibly heavy, as though it carried every question I'd been too afraid to ask since the day Daniel died. Its jagged edges were cold, cutting faintly into my skin as I clutched it tighter. The sound of it, the faint metallic clink when Elias set it down, seemed to echo through the entire basement. Where does it go? I asked, my voice barely steady. Elias didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the far side of the room, where a narrow corridor stretched into shadow. The light didn't reach that far, just a dark mouth carved into the concrete, breathing dust and silence. You've walked by it before, he said finally. You just didn't see it. I followed his gaze, my heartbeat thudding in my throat. The corridor looked like every other forgotten space in the building, damp, cracked, unremarkable. You're telling me this key opened something in there? I whispered. He nodded once. He wanted it hidden until you were ready. I almost laughed, but it came out brittle. Ready for what? Elias's eyes softened. The truth. The truth. 2 simple words, and yet they made my stomach twist. I'd spent years building walls around my grief, sealing every memory behind layers of routine and silence. Maybe Daniel had known that. Maybe he'd planned for it. Without another word, Elias picked up his flashlight and motioned toward the dark passage. I hesitated, glancing at the photograph still clutched in my other hand. I could feel Daniel's handwriting pressed against my palm, faint but real. Are you coming? Elias asked quietly. I nodded. Show me. We walked in silence, the sound of our footsteps swallowed by the thick air. The corridor was colder here, the scent of oil and metal stronger. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping occasionally, each drop landing with a hollow echo. Dust hung in the air like mist, and with every breath I tasted rust and memory. After a few minutes, we reached a heavy metal door. I'd passed this place before, near the maintenance hallway that tenants weren't supposed to enter. I'd never paid attention to it. It was just another door in a building full of them. But now, up close, I could see the faint outline of letters etched into the steel. Time had worn them down, but they were still visible. DAR Daniel Aaron Rhodes. My husband's initials. My pulse quickened. "This can't be real," I whispered. "He couldn't have—" Elias raised the flashlight, the beam catching the lock, a small, rusted padlock, ancient and worn but still intact. "He left this for you," he said softly. "He said you'd know when to open it." I stared at the lock, my breath shaking. The key felt like ice in my hand. "I don't even know what's behind that door." Elias stepped back, his voice calm but low. "Neither did I." I hesitated, then slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, a sound that was both mechanical and heartbreakingly human, a click that reverberated through my bones. The padlock opened easily, like it had been waiting all this time. When I pulled the door open, the hinges groaned in protest. The smell hit me first, oil, dust, and something faintly sweet, like old paper. The flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing a space larger than I expected. It wasn't empty. Blueprints covered the walls, yellowed and curling at the edges. Some were nailed up, others pinned loosely, their corners fluttering in the draft. They weren't architectural plans. They were sketches, diagrams, notes, drawings of gears and panels, formulas scribbled in Daniel's handwriting. My knees almost buckled. I moved closer, running my fingers over one of the pages. I'd recognize that handwriting anywhere. The slight slant, the looping R's. Every mark screamed him, words like power reroute, structural integrity, signal override. Technical language, yes, but scattered between the notes were sentences that didn't belong, personal ones. "Keep her safe. She'll understand one day." Promise kept. The air caught in my throat. "He was here," I whispered. "He worked down here." Elias said nothing. He stood quietly near the door, the flashlight steady in his hand. "He didn't tell you everything about his job," he said finally. "You knew he fixed things, but not where, not what kind." I shook my head slowly. Daniel had always been vague about his work. He'd tell me just enough to ease my curiosity, but never enough to invite more questions. "It's boring maintenance stuff," he'd say with that familiar grin. "You'd fall asleep if I explained it." But standing here, surrounded by his blueprints, I understood that he hadn't been bored. He'd been hiding something. Against the far wall stood a metal locker, its paint chipped, the handle streaked with rust. My heart started to race. The initials DAR were etched there too, deeper and clearer than the ones on the door. I took a step forward, my fingers trembling as I reached for the latch. "Is this what he wanted me to find?" I asked. Elias didn't move closer. "Open it," he said. "It's yours." The metal was cold beneath my hand, the latch stiff but not locked. I pulled gently, and the door creaked open. Inside was a single envelope, no dust on it, no decay. It was clean, untouched, as if someone had placed it there yesterday. The dim light caught the edges of the paper, revealing faint creases where it had been handled carefully. I stared at it for a long moment before reaching in. My fingers brushed against the paper, and a shiver ran up my arm. The envelope felt warm, alive somehow. When I turned it over, my breath hitched. My name, written across the front in Daniel's handwriting. Perfectly, unmistakably his. The flashlight flickered once, and in that brief pulse of light, the ink on the envelope seemed to shimmer, like it had just been written. My knees went weak as Elias stepped back into the shadows, his voice low, almost reverent. He said once you read it, everything changes. The first line hit me like a knife. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. For a long time, I couldn't open it. My hands just hovered over the envelope, trembling. The edges were worn, the seal fragile with age, yet it felt indestructible, as if it had been waiting years for this exact moment. My name, written in Daniel's handwriting, stared back at me, steady and certain. I wanted to believe it wasn't real. I wanted to believe my eyes were lying, but deep down, I knew. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't a coincidence. Elias stood quietly a few feet away, his flashlight lowered, his expression unreadable. The hum of the pipes and the faint buzz of the light above us filled the silence between us. I could feel his gaze, but I couldn't meet it. I wasn't ready for witness to this, to the unraveling of whatever had been holding me together. Finally, I slid a finger beneath the seal. The paper tore softly, a sound so delicate it felt sacrilegious. Inside was a folded letter, slightly yellowed, the ink faintly smudged but intact. My breath shook as I unfolded it. The smell of paper and old ink filled the air. Then I saw the first line. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home." The words blurred for a moment as tears gathered in my eyes. I blinked hard, forcing myself to keep reading. "Claire, I wish I could have told you everything. I wanted to every day, but I couldn't. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want this weight to be yours, too." My vision wavered. His voice lived inside those words. The rhythm, the phrasing, the gentle way he always softened the truth. I could almost hear him saying it, almost feel the warmth of his hand on mine as he tried to explain something I wouldn't want to hear. "By the time you find this, you'll already have met Elias. He's not a stranger. He's the man who owes me his life, the man who promised to protect you when I couldn't." I froze, my pulse quickening. I looked up at Elias instinctively. He was staring at the floor now, the light angled away from his face. The shadow of guilt clung to him like a second skin. I turned back to the letter. "You probably don't remember me mentioning him, and that's good. He wasn't supposed to exist in your world. But everything I built, everything hidden in this building, was never meant to be found until the time was right. Everything I built." My mind flashed back to the blueprints on the walls, the sketches, the words scrawled in the margins. "Keep her safe." My fingers tightened on the paper. I was part of something I didn't understand. They told me it was maintenance, a systems upgrade, just wiring and diagnostics, but I started seeing patterns that didn't make sense. And when I asked questions, they stopped answering. My breath hitched. His tone, even in ink, changed here. The steady rhythm broke into something raw, urgent. "The night I died wasn't an accident. Something went wrong. I don't know if it was sabotage or fate, but when the system failed, Elias was trapped below. I couldn't save myself, but I saved him. I made sure he'd get out. And in return, he promised to find you." The tears spilled before I could stop them. I tried to keep reading through the blur. "He'll tell you the rest when you're ready. You always wanted the truth, even when it hurt. So here it is. I wasn't fixing an elevator that night. I was fixing what was underneath it." Underneath. The word stuck in my chest. I looked around the hidden basement, the blueprints, the diagrams, the faint hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor. My husband hadn't been a maintenance man. Not really. He'd been guarding something, building something, protecting something. And now, 2 years later, I was standing in the same place, following the trail he left like a map made of grief and guilt. My eyes fell to the next lines, written shakier, as if his hands had trembled. "If they find this, they'll destroy it. That's why I left the key with him. He knows where it leads. He knows what to show you. Don't be afraid when he does. I promise it will make sense when you see it." My lips trembled as I whispered the words aloud, my voice breaking. "He knows where it leads." Elias shifted slightly, the sound of his boots against the floor grounding me in the moment. "Claire, I've carried guilt for what I did. I took a job I didn't understand. I ignored the warnings. And it cost me everything. But if you're reading this, it means Elias kept his word. It means you're still here. And if you're still here, then there's a chance. A chance for peace, for truth, for you to finally stop looking back." The writing grew uneven near the end, the ink blotched in places. "I'm sorry I left you in the dark. I didn't mean to. I wanted to protect you. I always did. Don't hate Elias. He's the last piece of me left, Follow him. He knows what you need to see." The words blurred completely now, my tears falling onto the page. I wiped them away gently, afraid to smudge the last pieces of him I had left. The final line sat alone, centered, written in heavier ink, deliberate, final. "Elias knows what you need to see. Ask him about the promise." The room seemed to tilt, the air thick with memory and revelation. I folded the letter back carefully, my hands trembling. The edges felt warm, almost alive, as if Daniel's pulse still lingered there. I looked up at Elias. He hadn't moved. His face was pale beneath the flickering light, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Something that looked like sorrow and loyalty twisted together. "What promise?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. "Elias," I said again, louder this time, the word cracking. "What promise?" He lifted his gaze slowly, meeting mine, and for a moment I saw it. That same grief, the same burden I carried, etched deep into his face. Elias took a slow breath, then said the words that would shatter the fragile world I'd rebuilt. "He made me promise," he whispered, "that when you found the letter, I'd show you what's left of him." And as the light above us flickered out, I realized that finding the letter wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything Daniel had been trying to hide. Elias looked at me with the kind of sorrow that doesn't belong to strangers. "He saved me," he said. "Now it's my turn to save you." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The dim light flickered above, throwing thin, uneven shadows across the walls, and all I could hear was the low hum of the pipes and the faint trembling in my own breath. Elias stood in front of me like a man carrying something unbearable, something that had been waiting for years to be said. I clutched Daniel's letter to my chest, feeling the weight of it press against my heartbeat. "What did he mean?" I asked finally, my voice raw. "What did he mean by what's left of him?" Elias exhaled slowly, his eyes dropping to the floor. "It started the night he died," he said. "The night of the fire." The word fire sliced through the air. My chest tightened. For 2 years I'd avoided that word. I never read the full report, never wanted to know what really happened. The officials had called it an accident, an electrical failure in one of the lower maintenance rooms that spread too quickly to contain. They said Daniel had gone back inside to help someone and never came out. I thought they meant a colleague. But as Elias spoke, I realized who that person was. "I was the one he went back for," Elias said quietly. "I was trapped in one of the lower tunnels. Smoke everywhere, cables falling, metal bending from the heat. I remember shouting, but no one could hear me. Everyone else had gotten out." He paused, his jaw tightening, his voice lowering. "Everyone except him." The room felt smaller as he spoke, the air thick with smoke that wasn't really there, only memory. "He came through the flames," Elias continued, eyes far away now. "I don't know how he found me. Maybe he followed the sound of me screaming. Maybe he just refused to leave anyone behind. He cut through a fallen beam, pulled me out, and got me to the corridor. I told him to come, but—" Elias's voice broke slightly. "He went back. He said there was something he needed to finish." I swallowed hard, the letter trembling in my hand. "The project," I whispered. He nodded. "Yes. Whatever he was building down here, he couldn't leave it. He told me to get out, to find you if anything happened, and I did. I tried. But by the time I got free, the fire had taken everything." The words hit me in waves, each one heavier than the last. I imagined Daniel in that moment, surrounded by heat and smoke, fighting his way toward something he believed mattered more than himself. That was who he was. Always running toward the fire, never away from it. "I thought about walking away," Elias said softly, "about forgetting it all. But then, a week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just a note inside, written in his hand." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. The edges were singed, the ink faded, but it was unmistakably Daniel's handwriting. He handed it to me. If I don't make it back, keep your word. She'll need you more than you know. The simplicity of it broke me. A single sentence. No goodbye, no explanation, just trust. I stared at the note, tears welling again. You kept your promise, I whispered. Elias nodded, his eyes wet. I didn't understand it then. I didn't understand why he'd risk his life for someone like me, or why he was so sure you'd find your way here. But after meeting you, after seeing how you've been carrying him all this time, I do now. He knew you wouldn't stop until you had answers. I couldn't look at him. I stared down at the floor, at the faint reflection of light against the concrete. The letter in my hand felt heavier now, the ink inside it more alive. Elias took a deep breath, his voice low. There's more. Something he built before the fire. Something he said would only open when you came. My head lifted. What are you talking about? He turned toward the far side of the room, toward a narrow section of wall that looked solid at first glance. But when he stepped closer, I saw it, the faint outline of a door, sealed shut with layers of metal and dust. The flashlight beam caught the edge of a handle barely visible beneath the grime. He built this for you, Elias said. His voice was steady now, certain. He told me that when the time came, I'd bring you here, that when you saw what was inside, you'd finally understand. I stared at the sealed door, my heartbeat rising. Understand what? Elias looked over his shoulder, his expression soft, almost sad. Why he never really left. He brushed the dust from the metal, revealing Daniel's initials etched faintly near the handle. The air felt charged, the kind of silence that exists right before a storm. Elias turned to me, eyes steady, voice low but certain. He built this for you, he said again. It's time you see it. When the door opened, I stepped into a time capsule, every piece of our life frozen in dust and love. Elias pressed his hand against the metal, and the door gave a long, groaning sigh before it yielded. The hinges, stiff with rust, resisted as though the past itself didn't want to be disturbed. The moment the seal broke, a gust of air swept through, stale, heavy, and intimate, the scent of something long untouched. I stepped forward, my hand trembling as I crossed the threshold. The flashlight beam swept through the room, illuminating a space that felt suspended between memory and reality. It wasn't a workshop, not exactly. It was something else. Sanctuary. The walls were lined with wooden shelves, each one covered in objects that belonged to us. Not things of value, but fragments of a life I'd thought was gone forever. On the nearest shelf sat the old ceramic mug Daniel had made for me during that ridiculous pottery class I'd dragged him to. The handle was still cracked where he'd dropped it, but he'd refused to throw it away. Perfection's overrated, he used to say. Flaws make things real. Beside it, there were photographs, dozens of them, taped to the wall in uneven rows. Some were faded, others pristine, as though he'd collected them over years. Our wedding photo, the one from our first road trip, a blurry one from that stormy night we'd danced in the kitchen while the power flickered. I reached out, my fingers brushing the edges, the paper cool beneath my skin. The tears came silently this time, not from pain but from the unbearable tenderness of seeing all the pieces he'd loved enough to keep. My breath shuddered as I turned toward the center of the room. A table stood there, covered in small notebooks, sketches, calculations, scraps of writing. Each page was covered in Daniel's handwriting, looping and uneven. One notebook lay open. Across the top of the page, in faded ink, he had written, "If she's reading this, it means I didn't make it, but it also means I kept my promise." I sank to my knees beside the table, the sound of my own heartbeat filling the silence. I flipped through the pages slowly. Notes about me, about us. Claire hates mornings. Remember to fix the bedroom window. Don't forget to laugh. Every page was a reminder that he'd known me so completely, and that he'd known, somehow, that I'd come here one day, searching for him. Elias stood by the doorway, silent. The light from his flashlight flickered across the walls, revealing more of Daniel's hidden world. An unfinished invention of some kind sat in the corner, wires coiled like veins across a half-built panel. It didn't look like much, but I knew Daniel well enough to know it meant something. He never built without purpose. I turned toward Elias, my voice barely a whisper. He knew, didn't he? He knew he wasn't coming home. Elias nodded, the faintest tremor in his jaw. He told me before the fire started. He said he'd seen it coming, the systems failing, the power surging. He said there wasn't enough time for both of us to make it out. My breath caught. He chose to stay. He chose you, Elias said quietly. I closed my eyes. The words hit me with a strange clarity. He hadn't just died trying to fix something. He died trying to protect everything he loved, including me. The pain was still there, deep and raw, but now it carried shape. Purpose. I walked deeper into the room, my hand trailing across the table until I found another note pinned beneath a paperweight. The handwriting was rushed, uneven. If she's here, tell her not to feel sorry. Tell her I finally built something that lasts. I smiled through tears, my chest tight. That was Daniel, always trying to turn tragedy into meaning, always building, always fixing, even when the broken thing was himself. Elias took a slow step closer. He called this his last promise, he said softly. He said if you ever found it, it would mean you'd finally stopped running from the pain. I turned toward him, my eyes burning. He thought I was running. He knew you were, Elias replied. He said grief would make you small for a while, but you'd find your way back. That's why he left this place for you, so you'd have somewhere to meet him one last time. I sank into the old chair by the table, the wood creaking beneath my weight. The air felt thick, but the ache in my chest had changed. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft, like an ache that was finally starting to loosen. He always said goodbye in strange ways, I murmured. Elias smiled faintly. He wasn't saying goodbye. He was keeping a promise. For a while, we just stood there, two people connected by the same ghost, surrounded by the evidence of a love that refused to die. The flashlight flickered again, throwing brief shadows across the walls before steadying. I didn't know how long we stayed there. Minutes, maybe hours. Time seemed to fold in on itself. Eventually, Elias cleared his throat, breaking the quiet. There's one more thing, he said. I looked up. What do you mean? He lifted the old toolbox, the same one that had started all of this. The metal glinted faintly in the low light, the handle worn smooth from years of use. He set it gently on the table in front of me, next to the notebooks and photographs. I almost forgot, he said quietly. He told me this would be the last thing. My eyes widened. There's something inside? Elias nodded. He said you'd know when to open it. I stared at the box, my reflection faintly visible in the scratched metal. My pulse quickened, not from fear this time, but from anticipation. The feeling that whatever waited inside was the final piece of Daniel's message. Did he ever tell you what's in it? I asked. Elias shook his head. No, he just said it was meant for you, and that once you opened it, my promise to him would be complete. He stepped back toward the doorway, his expression unreadable but gentle. Before leaving, Elias paused and looked at me one last time. He said it would make sense when you're ready, he said softly. His hand rested briefly on the toolbox. There's one last thing inside. He said you'd know when to open it. As his footsteps faded down the corridor, I stared at the box in front of me, the final secret of the man I'd loved and lost, waiting in silence for me to find the courage to lift the lid. Inside, beneath the tools and dust, was a small golden key tied to a faded ribbon, and a note that simply read, "Now you can let me go." For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. The toolbox sat on the table, silent, still, carrying the kind of weight that has nothing to do with metal or tools. I stared at it, tracing the scratches along its surface, every mark a story, every dent a memory. This was Daniel's world, ordinary things that somehow carried meaning beyond their use. Even the silence around it felt sacred, like the space between two heartbeats. I reached for the latch, and for a moment I hesitated. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the thought that there might be something inside, or that there might not. I wanted answers, but part of me also feared what those answers might demand of me. When I finally lifted the lid, the hinges groaned softly, releasing a breath of dust and the faint, warm scent of oil. Daniel's scent. My fingers sifted through the contents. A screwdriver, a roll of electrical tape, an old wrench with his initials etched into the handle. All the things that had built our life together, now reduced to relics. Then I saw it, tucked beneath a rag, and a handful of rusted screws. A small golden key tied to a faded ribbon. It gleamed faintly even through the layer of dust, delicate but purposeful, the metal still warm as if someone had only just placed it there. My breath caught as I lifted it. Underneath, folded neatly, was a small piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly, hands trembling. In his familiar handwriting were 5 simple words. "Now you can let me go." The letters blurred as my tears spilled, dropping onto the paper. My throat tightened, the ache in my chest breaking open into something new. Not pain, not sorrow, but release. He hadn't left me another mystery. He'd left me permission. Permission to stop waiting. Permission to breathe again. I turned the key over in my palm, the metal catching the dim light. I knew instantly where it belonged. I'd known all along. In the corner of my apartment, untouched since the funeral, sat a small jewelry box. I'd kept it locked for 2 years, unable to open it, unable to face the remnants of the life I'd buried inside. Inside were wedding memories, photographs, and his ring, or what was left of it. I'd found it months after his death, burned and bent from the fire. I couldn't bear to look at it. My heart pounded as I left the hidden room behind. I climbed the stairs in silence, each step echoing with the rhythm of that old tune, faint in my memory. When I reached my apartment, I walked straight to the shelf where the jewelry box sat, covered in a thin film of dust. The small golden key fit perfectly. The lock clicked open with a quiet finality, like a sigh. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. The folded wedding invitation, the dried flower from my bouquet, and beneath them, the small ring I hadn't touched since the night of the fire. But as I lifted it into the light, my breath caught. It wasn't blackened anymore. The gold shone softly, restored, whole. The engraving inside, "Always come home," gleamed clear as the day he'd slipped it on my finger. I didn't understand how it was possible. Maybe Elias had done it. Maybe Daniel had planned it all. Or maybe some things just find their way back when you're ready to see them again. I closed my hand around the ring, feeling its warmth press into my skin. For the first time since he died, the weight of his memory didn't crush me. It steadied me. I could almost hear his voice in the quiet. "You can stop fixing what's broken now, Claire. You did it. You kept your promise." A quiet knock pulled me from the thought. I opened the door, but the hallway was empty. The faint scent of oil and metal lingered. Elias's scent. I stepped out into the corridor, scanning both directions. Nothing. Only silence. I called his name once, softly. "Elias?" No answer. I walked toward the elevator. The light above the button flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. For the first time, the silence didn't feel hollow. It felt peaceful. I slipped the ring onto my finger, and a strange calm settled over me. Closure wasn't something Daniel could give me. It was something he'd built for me to find on my own. Every step, every clue, every haunting note of that familiar tune had been his way of leading me home. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Empty. Still. Waiting. I stepped inside, setting the old key gently on the floor. "Thank you," I whispered, to Daniel, to Elias, to the past that had finally loosened its grip. The doors began to close, but just before they did, I heard it, faint and distant, drifting through the shaft like a memory caught in the air. That same melody, the lullaby he used to hum when I couldn't sleep. It rose for a few seconds, gentle and familiar, then faded slowly into silence, leaving only the hum of the elevator and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. When I turned to say goodbye, Elias was gone. But from deep within the elevator shaft, that old tune drifted one last time, low and haunting, until it disappeared completely. And in the quiet that followed, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. If this story made your heart ache the way it did mine, don't leave just yet. There are more stories waiting, about love, loss, and the things we find in the dark. Subscribe now and tell me, if you found a message from someone you lost, would you open it?